for all of us. So today we are going to continue history, and we're going to take an important step. We're going to talk about one of the grandfathers, forefathers of political thought, one of the real OGs, Mr. Plato himself. I think you've all heard at least the name Plato or Plato. This is probably would sound more in Greek. And we're going to talk about him today. Now, Plato is a very interesting person to teach about. There's a lot to say. He is one of the founders of political philosophy, of philosophy in general, right? He is not, maybe in a practical sense, the most influential of them. That probably is Karl Marx. But in the theoretical sense, that means how many philosophers have read him, he's probably the most influential person we'll see in the course. Partly because he's just the first, and partly because, well, people refer to him a lot. You could think of it like this. If this was a Reddit thread or a forum, Plato would be the original poster, and then everybody else is replying to him. That's kind of how you can see it. He was not the first in his line of thought. You had Socrates, his teacher. However, we only know about Socrates through the writing of Plato. So Socrates is a character in Plato's books. So you could argue the ancient conspiracy theory that Socrates doesn't even exist and that he's just Plato's, well, character that he plays. As I said, very influential. And what makes him interesting is that he's so wild and so different and radical in various ways that he's influencing opposing ideologies. Like he's been influential in conservative thought, he's been influential in communist thought, which normally don't go together. And he also fits very well with the Christian worldview, which partly explains why he remained relevant for a long while. Now, above all, he's hard to pinpoint where he is. You could call him a communist, but then he's very anti-communist in other senses. But above all, he is about knowledge. He's an advocate of technocracy, the idea that experts should rule. If you have to summarize his political thought in one line, that would be it, right? That's his point. So he's against everything I explained last week in my class on democracy when I talked about the value. He's the opposite of that. Although he was from Athens, he lived that life. He was in a democracy. He just hated all of it. Plato was a real academic. He had an academy, so he was like the director of a school. He was like Abraham, but if Abraham wrote world-changing books, he still has time to do that. And it was a very successful academy. One of his students was Aristotle, the guy we'll see next time. Now, Plato wrote a lot about a lot of subjects, and we don't have at all the time to cover that. So I'm going to focus just on his political work, which are 3 books, The Republic, The Statesman, and The Laws. I will focus most my time on the first one, The Republic, because this is when he was young and still radical and still hopeful about the world. The other 2 books are books he wrote before his death, and they're much more bitter and less interesting in general. The Republic is, let's say, his most intriguing work. See? Can we work with that? We're really dropping numbers, by the way. Good. For the 6, you can tell the other 10 people who are missing, right, that they will burn in hell now. Plato. Before I explain his politics, I have to explain a little general philosophy. Now, this is a thing of its own. As Platonism, what you would call a general worldview, right? And I could dedicate not just the whole class, but more like a month to that. We don't have that time, so I'm going to go over it very quickly. But just know that whatever I tell you is not enough, right? Whatever I'm going to tell you, this is very limited, and it's my interpretation of it. So, what do you need to know about this worldview? The first thing, which is the weirdest, is his essentialism. What does that mean? It means that Plato believes that things in the world have a perfect essence. So if you look around you in the world, right, you will agree with me that things are not perfect. Almost everything has some kind of flaw, right? Almost everything tries to be something, but it doesn't really achieve it. So you would, you have political systems, but none of them are perfect. You have good people, right, and bad people, but let's say good people now. But none of those good people are perfect, right? Not even the Pope, not even saints are perfect. Not even Christ was perfect, according to himself. So that that doesn't exist, but they have a certain amount of goodness in them, right? They have a part of that perfection in them, but not the full thing. Just like in terms of beauty, for example, you have many, if not all, beautiful women, but none is perfect, right? Except, I know, your girlfriend, but you should think that. But all the others are not perfect, right? They are beautiful to a certain extent. So the something like beauty, right? Perfect beauty is theoretically possible, but we don't encounter it, or we don't encounter it often in this world, right? Almost everything is flawed, and it resembles something that is deeper, but it's not that. Now, that's central to Plato's idea of the universe. He thinks that behind the appearance of a thing, it relates to an essence of a perfect idea, as he called it. So let me give another example of color, for example. Look around you. You probably see something that is black, right, in your room. That thing isn't actually black. That thing is very, 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 very dark blue, or very, very, very dark red. Real black almost doesn't exist. It does exist. Somebody made it, one artist in a lab, and you just can't see it. It's that black. There's just like you're seeing stuff, and then you see nothing at all. Not even the edges of the thing you see. You can see that is real black, right? That would be the perfect idea, but that's not what really in common life exists, right? But Plato thinks that these perfect things, like pure black or pure beauty or pure truth or I know pure apple, whatever essence of something it is, like the perfect apple, we can think of them, right? We don't easily find them, but we can think of them. And the fact that they exist in our head to Plato must mean something, right? They must be somewhere. Okay, it's not the same as existing in reality, but they exist nonetheless. They are part, the idea of perfection that you have in your head is part of the universe. Yeah, maybe mentally, but nonetheless part of the universe. And so he says there is this realm of perfect ideas. I know what I'm saying is super abstract, right? And it probably was a stoner, but whatever. There is this realm of perfect ideas. It's a bit like heaven, right? A place where everything is perfect, right? The apple is perfect. The horse is perfect. The man and the woman are perfect, right? And things in our world, in reality, they correspond to that. They have a part of that in them. And they can help us think about it, but they're not the perfect idea. Now, Plato says, well, if this exists, and he thinks this exists, that's his whole theory, then we should try to know these perfect ideas. right? If there's an objective good, right? There's like a perfect idea of good, which probably is the same as beauty, as truth, etc. Plato, all good things are the same thing. Then we should try to know that. Yeah, that would be very good. If we would know what true beauty is, if we would know what, I don't know, how real red looks like, all these questions, that in itself would be good, right? Truth means knowledge of perfect ideas, and truth is good. If this is vague, let me explain it with its own metaphor. That of the cave. You probably saw this in high school, Plato's cave. What's the idea? The idea is that we're stuck in a cave. It's dark. We cannot look behind us. We're kind of prisoners in a cave. And behind us is stuff, but we cannot see it because we can't turn around. And behind that stuff is a fire. So the fire casts shadows, right? So in front of us we see things. For example, this right here is a statue of a pig, right? Now imagine the pig is behind me, and then there's a light, and I see the reflection of this in front of me. So I'm going to think that's the pig, right? And it relates to a pig, it's the shadow of a pig, but it's not really the truth. Yeah, first of all, it's a shadow. Second, it's not even a shadow of a pig, it's a shadow of a wooden pig, which itself is a reflection of a real pig. And that pig is not even the perfect pig, right? So in order to learn the truth, I would first of all somehow manage to look behind me and see that it's just a shadow, right? And then from this, I could somehow theorize how a real pig must look like. And then I will know things. That's his idea. We must know the real idea, the essence behind things. All right. If that sounds weird to you, that's because it is. But we're going to leave that aside now. The point here is that knowledge is the most important thing. Knowledge is ethics. Knowledge is good because it's good. It's knowledge of perfection. All right. Now let's turn to humans, right? How does he see the human? Does the human have an essence? And if so, is it good or bad? Well, his answer to that is no. Yeah, we have an essence, but we have two essences, he said. We're not essentially good or bad. We have both in us. You have a higher and a lower self, and the one is instinctual and the other is rational. And we don't really know which one to follow. Yeah. So that's very interesting here. Very interesting what he's saying. When he says we want both. Yeah. So you both want the hamburger and you want the salad to stay healthy, right? You're going to choose one of them, but you desire both for different reasons. Just like you both want to cheat on your girl and you want to be loyal. Right? And you're going to be like, I don't want to cheat on my girl, but you're lying, right? If you see one else that looks good, the thought is going to cross your mind. So you want it to some extent. You're not going to do it, right? But you want different things. We both want evil and good. We just need to choose between those. So we don't have one tendency that's stronger than the other in us, he would say. And it's not just that we're confused about what to do. We don't even know what is good or bad. At least not intuitively, right? We don't know what's good for society because we don't know the consequences of things before we do them. So he says, it all depends on how we reason this. It all depends on philosophy. If we can figure out what's good or bad, okay, then we can make informed choices. I personally find this idea very convincing, his idea of self. It's very close to the Christian idea, right? That you're torn between good and evil. I really like the idea of both. The idea that we want all things at the same time. I think that's very close to how things psychologically actually work. I think it's much better than 90% of philosophers after him, his idea on this. If you think about it, people sometimes say things like, oh, you act like you are, or you are what you eat, or this kind of deterministic stuff. But you're multiple things. It's not like you are one thing. you multiple things, and you become more what you act like. But you know, I like this idea of the first idea, essentialism. This is a bit science fictiony, but anyway, that's Platonism. Yeah. Now let's move to politics. Plato wrote some books about politics because he wants to change the world. But before I go into that, do you have questions? Because I talk a bit fast. Do you have questions? Yes?
No, we don't.
Oh, you don't? Oh, that's good. All right. So Plato wants to change the world. He thinks we should have a new state. He doesn't like how things are. He is not interested in writing about politics as they are, like making a discussion about Athenian democracy, or how we could things better, or who you should vote for, or what the next assembly should be about. He has no interest in that. He probably did this in real life, right? Because he was probably allotted in to be leader at some point, like a lot of people. But he didn't write about this. He wanted to start from zero. He said we need to start all from the beginning, right? Here you can see the pan stacking that cash. I'll come back later to this picture. You want to start from zero. There's two reasons for this. First reason is that he thinks the people are way too stupid. It says the state that we have right now just fails. This doesn't work at all. You must understand that when he lived, Athens was not at its peak. He lived in quite bad times. This was right after they lost the war with Sparta. So he was not very impressed by the politics of his own city. He said, well, the main problem is that people are stupid, right? Either we are in a democracy and people are stupid, or we have an oligarchy, which means that the rich are in power, and they're ignorant as well. So everything I tried to convince you of last week, he's going to go against. He said we cannot trust people, well, not because the people are stupid actually, but the people don't know. So we can ask people what they want, that's true, and then we'll know what they want, but that doesn't mean that that's the correct thing to do, right? Maybe they all want to go to war, but we're going to lose the war, and then we shouldn't have gone to war. Yeah. So it's not that the people are bad rulers. It's just that this is not the best thing to do. It could not be the best thing to do. We don't know if it's the best thing to do. He says even worse. If you have an oligarchy with just a few rulers, right? Just an elite ruling, a mafia de poder. The only thing these people are good at is getting in that position, he would say. This is interesting if you think about politicians, right? Not the leaders, like not presidents and governors, but career politicians, like the leaders of political parties, for example, which can be the same people. All they're experts in is being politicians, right? They're good at getting votes and talking bad to other politicians. So Plato says, well, these people, they're experts, but they're experts in power, not necessarily in any of the things they need to decide on. So that is not interesting either. He says, and it's not like we already have figured this out. Yeah, we don't know what's best. What are you going to do? You're going to ask some old person, right? Some wise old person says, no, that's not, the person doesn't know. Wisdom is knowing what's right to do or what works in your situation based on experience. But we're not talking about like what works here. We're trying to create this perfect state, right? We're trying to create the future, not the past. So we cannot base it on wisdom. So we need to figure this out. We need to think about it. We need to study first of all before we do anything. And that makes sense in his time, right? Because this is 500 before Christ. People didn't know a lot, right? People didn't understand basic scientific things. People didn't know where rain came from for example. So you must understand in his context, right? He doesn't say all people are ignorant forever. He just says people around me 2,500 years ago, if we're honest, don't know a lot. So we should focus on the knowing part when thinking about politics. So it's not useful to study politics. That's where the last place you should start is studying politicians. That's an opinion, right? Some people strongly disagree with that. Machiavelli, for example, only studies politicians. He has no interest in creating a better world. Plato is the opposite. Plato has no interest in actual politics at all. He's only interested in thinking about what should we do. There's a question from Miss Astrid.
Yes, I do have a question. Okay, Plato mentions that, well, democracy and oligarchy are, well, rulers are often ignorant, but what's the way that Plato arranges the government? Or is it the republic the way that he arranges it? Because I'm not completely sure.
I'm going to explain you all of that in the rest of the lecture. Um, so he has a plan. He has a plan. And I'm going to explain that later. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Because I'll have slides, etc. It'll be easier than if I answer it now. But he has a plan for this. But let's first talk about why things are wrong and why he needs a plan. Because he's the only one doing. He's the first person in history to think of a totally new plan. The others are just trying to change things a little bit. Yeah. The other reason why he wants things to change is because of inequality. This is original. He says that the main problem of why things are messed up is because they're chaotic. We're constantly fighting each other, right? And he's looking at he lived both. He both lived oligarchy and democracy in his time. They switched when he was alive. He says, well, they're constantly disagreeing. They're constantly fighting with each other. It's a bit like he's talking about Mexican politics, right? Um, Everything is politicized. Everything is a fight all the time. And that's why we're not advancing, right? Nobody's being constructive. And he says, okay, that's very cliche criticism, but here is original. He says, the reason why we are constantly fighting each other is inequality. He says, below all of this, there's always a situation where somebody has a lot and other person don't have enough, or somebody has whether it's money or power, etc. And they're going to fight over it, right? It's between the haves and the have-nots. All conflicts, more or less, can be reduced to haves and have-nots, rich and poor. There's very nice quotes that I lost somehow in this lecture on this, where he pinpoints this to be the main problem. And we'll see later with Marx, much later, that this is the main problem, right? Marx will prove this a bit more solidly. So this is potentially an endless cause of disharmony, an endless cause of chaos. As long as we have rich and poor, there's going to be exploitation, suppression, and rebellion in these cycles. So that's what we should focus on, right? And you can still see this with conflicts today, even a lot of wars. For example, wars in the Middle East, which you think are about religion, right? Shia versus Sunni Muslims. But really, they're about power. They're about, okay, one of our groups is going to be on top and the other is going to be at the bottom. And I don't want to be at the bottom, so I'm going to try to kill you, right? That's what a lot of conflicts come down to. Now, Plato doesn't want any of this. Plato's a grumpy guy. He doesn't want drama, right? He says, so how do we get rid of the drama? And he's radical. You start seeing this here. Plato says, okay, since there's always fight between rich and poor, we should get rid of both of them. We should eliminate both positions. There shall be no more rich and there shall be no more poor. What we'll do is we'll take the money from the rich, give to the poor, then everybody's middle class. Ya basta. Right? This is how we're going to keep it. There's going to be economic equality. In other words, Plato is one of the first people to formulate one of the ideals of communism, right? The idea of redistribution. Better said, the idea of eliminating these positions. Now, he would not be a communist in the Marxist sense, because some of the things he says are deeply antisocial. But this idea of economic equality to solve conflict, that is probably the first formulation in history of this communist-like idea with him. So he's going to create a new state. Right? Now, here we're going to answer some of the questions that Astrid was asking. So for him, the idea is not to create a better system. The idea is to create a perfect system. He wants to think of this perfect idea, remember? He thinks that there is something like an essentially perfect state. It must exist, he says, right? There is a perfect way of humans to organize, and I'm going to try to figure that out in this book called The Republic. So this ideal states exist, and it must be universal, right? It must be the same for all people. Otherwise, it wouldn't be perfect. So the essence of our form of organizing, that must be something globally true. So that's not just for Athens. That must be valid everywhere. And thus, I'm going to find it out. But this is a work in progress, right? So if we need to figure out what the best state is, then the person, and this is a thing you do in real time, the person that should be in charge of the state should be a philosopher. Yes, so somebody who's good at thinking, who's good at figuring things out. So his proposal, first of all, for who to be the leader is to be a philosopher king. So the smartest person in society. Well, not the smartest, the most educated person in society, they should be the leader, is his idea. They should be the king. So he's going to propose some kind of kingdom, right? It's already confusing because the book is called The Republic, but, well, he invented the word and he has a different meaning to it than we use the word today. So there will be a philosopher king. And the philosopher king needs to figure out what a society is and implement it. Now, this perfect society, right, is good because it's perfect, not because you like it. It's a very important point he's making here, right? He says we should do good because it's good, not because it's convenient. The road to this perfect society might be very annoying, maybe even painful. But that's not the point. The point is that we're trying to build society, right? And that's your duty as a citizen. It's not about you. It's about what world we are creating. Now, this is, that's what I just said is, let's say, the baseline for all radicalism, right? The idea that this is the same with the common, any utopian ideology, communism, neoliberalism, and any system that thinks it's perfect is going to accept sacrifice in getting there, right? So that's the original formulation of this, and it's not necessarily a bad point. Who would choose philosopher king? Nobody would choose philosopher king. It would just be apparent who that is. That would be the guy that's the highest educated. That's just I think he assumes that other smart people would recognize who's the smartest. But the idea is more that you would breed the philosopher king. Like you would take a very smart kid and then dedicate all his energy to training that person to be the best. Now, Plato is not about details, right? Plato is about the big plan. He did think it through, but it's not necessarily practical what he's proposing. He wasn't really concerned with the practicality of things. He was concerned with things sounding perfect. Okay, so what's the organizing principle of the society, right? I'm going to spend a lot of time describing this society of his. Um, he says, well, the main idea here is that we have a harmonious division of labor, that our state, that our society, better said, works in a way that's good for everybody, or at least where everybody contributes to the good. So he says we must understand a few things. This is like half the book, right? That I summarized in one slide, but very, very summarized. Oh, and before I go into this, right? None of what I'm going to say is things he actually did or ever happened, right? Plato's idea is not practical. But it's more about inspirational value, and it's about starting to think about things, and about he just throws ideas at the wall, radical ideas that in themselves can be interesting, right? It doesn't necessarily come together into something brilliant, but the parts of it are brilliant. So he says, okay, what's the logic here? First, we must recognize that nobody is really self-sufficient. We need each other. Okay, maybe you could be self-sufficient if you lived in the woods, but your life will suck. And if that was that great, then more of you would be doing it, but you're not, right? You're here in society in Monterey, living with other people. You could have chosen to live on your own, but you don't, and for good reasons. Your life would be short and brutal. So he says nobody really is self-sufficient, at least not a person that lives a life worth living. So we live together in a society which takes the form of a system of services and needs, right? We need certain things, we can do certain things, and we try to help each other out. Or we don't necessarily are helping each other through, among other things, the economy. Now, the most important thing, he says, ethically speaking here, is the role one has in society. Yes, we can talk about your hair color, your favorite, I know your favorite show, who your parents are. That's all good. But the most important thing is what you're doing, he would say, for an adult, right? The most important thing in your life is your job, basically. Which in his day was not like this was before capitalism, right? It's not like you work 8 hours for a paycheck. If you're a smith, you'd be like your whole life, you would live in your workshop making nails, right? There's a bit stronger identity between a person and a job that you have now. So he says the most important thing about you is your role in society. And what should you do there? Well, you should be useful to society, and you're probably most useful when you're doing what you're best at. That makes sense, right? We should all do what we're best at. But what does that mean? Well, you can be talented at something, right? And that's a start, but it's mostly training, he says. Training outpaces talent. You can get good at most things. You just need to spend a lot of time in specializing in that, and getting really good at something, in knowing things, in knowledge and training and education. Now, there might be a bit of a conflict there, right? You don't always want what you're best at. Let's say, for example, if you have let's say my own son. My own son is for his age is particularly strong and large. He's 100% on each curve. So he would probably, I don't know how he's going to grow up, but if he stays like he is now, he's going to be a giant. He would probably be a good soldier, right? But maybe he doesn't want to be a soldier. He wants to be an artist. Well, Plato would say, oh, boo-hoo, stop complaining. You're going to be a soldier, right? That's what you're good at. Just get over it. Do this, go to military academy, learn all these weapons, and you're going to be a soldier, right? So our duty in life, and so our duty towards society, is just to get good at what we're best at, to get perfect at what we're good at, better said, to train in a specific role. And the state is the one who has to organize this, to make sure that everybody can get to this role. Now, if you have a hard time imagining what the hell kind of system this is, you might have seen the movie Divergent. I don't know if any of you has seen this movie. Did anyone?
Yes,
Yes.
teacher.
Yes.
That's what Plato wants. That's society. So where you kind of, when you're 18, the state tells you what you should do. Okay, maybe you can choose not to, but like once you're on that path, you're all about that. You have to do what you're good at, and that's how society is going to be in harmony. So a divergent, I think Divergent is based on the Republic. That's what he's aiming for, but then no science fiction, right? Before Christ type of society. Now, until here, you could say he's like a socialist, right? But he's not, because he doesn't really respect working class people. He says, well, there are many roles you can play in life, but we can group them in three big groups. There are three prime talents that people can have. And this is a very classist idea, and I hate all of this, but whatever. He says some people are good in production, right? They're the craftsmen, the people who make stuff. Some people, and again, this is a bit more complex, right? Than today manning a machine, right? You have to study to be a baker or a pottery or to weave stuff. That's takes a certain amount of skill. That's the majority of people, and you also have slaves, etc. But let's not talk about that now. Because Plato was not a big fan of slaves, he just accepted it. Then you have people who are good at managing other people. That's the guardian class, he would call them, right? Managers, police, this type of folk, teachers, these type of people. And then you have people who are good at governing, right? Who are good at being the leader. So you get three classes: the craftsmen, the officials and guards and the army and all of that, people who work in the state, and then you have the ruler. So this is kind of like, like the bees live, right? You have worker bees and guardian bees, and you have the queen bee. Very, very conservative. So he's kind of elitist here. He does say they're all important. Like, he doesn't think working class people are idiots, because he recognizes that it takes a certain amount of knowledge to be a farmer. You, Miss Anna Laura, I don't know if you're from the country, but you couldn't just start being a farmer tomorrow, right? That would take some training. So he says the working class are not stupid, they just know nothing about politics. So they should stay out of it, right? You working class people, I like you, stay away. Yeah, stay away from my academy, not from my academy, stay away from politics. We know what's good for you, yeah? So that's how he sees it. Now, it's important to understand that these are not castes. So it's not like you're born into one of these three groups and then your children will be too. Like in Divergent, you learn this when you're an adult, where you are, right? It's not because I don't know what the groups in Divergent are, but it's not, I don't know. You have administrators, I guess, right? It's not because you're just, I think the protagonist is the daughter of an administrator. It's not because your dad is an administrator that you're going to be that. It's likely, but not necessarily. So you're not born into this, but soon it will be figured out. And everybody needs to go to education to figure out what they're good at. Yeah, that's how he sees it. So how do all these people, these classes, live together, right? Why would they want this? Why would they accept this? He says, well, because they would all understand the justice behind that. Right? That's the if you talk about what's the idea behind the state, the perfect idea behind the state, Plato would say it's justice. It's perfect justice, because justice creates the harmony. He says society is best when everybody is realizing their potential, and that is his concept of justice. Justice, he says, means that each man and woman is given the place in society where they can contribute maximally so that society functions best. In other words, justice means that everybody gets what they deserve. Yeah, that makes sense. Justice is that you get exactly what's right for you. And that is going to allow you to contribute to society, which is also just. So this idea of justice is composed of two values. It's inclusion. That means everybody gets a place, and preferably the right place where they can feel most useful. But everybody needs to contribute to society. Yeah, there's no such thing as going for yourself. We're going to take care of you, but you need to cooperate. Yeah, that's a possible conception of justice, right? Social justice. Um, and we're going to see a lot of other philosophers are going to copy this idea later. A lot of the best ones, the most interesting ones. Although we should take a moment to appreciate how different this is from what justice means in our society. Yeah. This concept of justice just doesn't exist today. You won't be giving what's best for you. Yeah, you have to somehow chaotically figure that out and then fail to achieve that in life, and nobody's going to help you. The government's going to help you a little bit, but nobody else is, right? And all what people try and do is not pay taxes and cheat the system and try to contribute as least as possible to society. So that's not where we are, because our concept of justice is based on rights. Yeah, the justice system, what they do is that you have a certain amount of rights. If they get violated, you go to court and they punish the person or they repay you. Right? That's what justice literally means in our society. People have a certain amount of, let's say, lines you cannot cross, and if you cross that line, then the justice system will fix that, at least in theory. But that has nothing to do with how useful you are, right? If I have a company that's destroying the country, but you steal from me, even if your act was morally correct, um, justice is that you go to jail and I keep doing this, right? There's nothing to do with how society is organized, the liberal idea of justice. Plato comes with a quite heavy alternative to that. But he's not naive. He knows that this is very hard to achieve, right? Justice. Um, but Susanna is going to ask me something.
Uh, yes. Uh, does Plato believe that women are in the same place as men?
Yes, Plato is probably the first feminist. So Plato doesn't think all humans are equal. For example, he doesn't like slaves because he thinks it's a very risky system because he thinks the slaves might rebel and such. So he thinks it's not smart to have slaves, but he didn't protest against it much either. So he's not like he's not a Chairo, but a woman he considered them equal, at least in intellect. He thought that women on the inside, in their head, were the same as men, or at least had the same capacities. And we're going to talk about that in a bit. He also has an explanation for why women then are not in higher positions, like why women fail even if they're equal. And he has a solution to that, um, a feminist solution where he's going to try to emancipate women a bit. So he's different. Most people in his day and most people after him did not think, but he did. Does it answer your question, Miss Susan?
Yes, thank you.
Susanna, sorry. All right. So Plato said we need this justice, but it's hard because there's some things that are in the way of justice that we need to solve first, right? So now let's talk a bit about this picture here, right? Of the senators and those delicious bags of money. Plato knew about this problem, right? There maybe was no pan or no pre in his day, but there was corruption. So he says, okay, one of the things we must get a hand of, a hand on, if we want to create this perfect state, is corruption, right? And as you've noticed by now, Plato's a radical. Plato's not playing games. He's not going for the halfway solutions. So he has some very real draconian measures against corruption. The first one of them, and they're gonna really, they're far-reaching, right? He would be AMLO's favorite fiscalia if he had one, if he lived today. The first one is that leaders cannot have private property. He says, if you want to be a leader, if you want to be in politics, if you want to serve the people, you have to let go of everything. You must live with the other politicians, right? You must eat with them. You must just you're gonna live in a military base, basically, in today's understanding, right? You're gonna live in that palace. You're gonna sell everything you had before, and that's it. You don't get a wage. We just give you food. You have nothing. Yeah. If you want to be the boss, you must renounce all property. So if you're in that state where you have nothing and like nothing, right? You just have a bed and you go to work and people feed you, but that's it. You're not going to steal because you can't have stuff, so you can't buy it either, right? Let's say you do steal and you sneak into the shop, but they're going to reach, oh yeah, that's the king. He can't have stuff. Yeah, okay. So you can't get it. So in this scenario, if you can have property, well, you can't try to get it either because where are you going to keep it? You don't even have a house. So in this sense, this is very interesting, right? If we would translate that to today, right? Imagine you already have austeridad, but let's say we take it a notch further, right? Things would be different. Public services would also be better if all leaders, all of them, had to take the bus and had to be with the IMS. And AMLO kind of did like a mini version of this, but if they had no privileges whatsoever, they had to live as poor people do, then probably they would help poor people a lot more, right? They would raise the bottom. That's the idea here with Plato. If you can't have stuff, you can't be corrupt either. He says, but that's not enough, because corruption is two things, right? It's about money, but it's also about favors. He says, so let's try to get rid of the other one too. And here's even more radical. He says, the second thing we should do is take away the family of leaders. Leaders, if you want to be the boss, if you want to be in charge of stuff, you should not have a family, he says. Because if you do, then there's other people in your life that you cannot say no to that might ask you for favors. Yeah, are you going to try to make them, let's say, your generals or whatever, and you're going to have nepotism and you're going to have corruption in that sense. But your only loyalty, the only thing you should be thinking about are the people in general, is the state, not your sister, not your children, not your wife. Yeah. So if you're the leader, you cannot, it's not, you don't have to be celibate. Yeah, you don't have to be a priest. You can have a sexual partner, just not the same one. Yeah, you can sleep around and stuff, but you can't have a girlfriend or a boyfriend or anything like that. Can't have a wife, can't have a husband. And if you do get people pregnant, then those children should be raised by someone else. Yeah, but you don't spend any time with family. One side effect of this and one intended purpose of this is that it would allow women to be rulers. Because if you don't have this, women typically are going to be married and have children in this time, then they will be occupied with the married life because, you had no dishwashers and washing machines and all this stuff back then. So running a household, cooking, etc., like you had to do everything yourself from scratch, right? Unless you had slaves. So that's a lot of work. So a woman would typically just be occupied with managing the property and managing their family. Therefore, you never see women in power. It's a very feminist reasoning, right? So he says what we need, if you outsourcing children really means daycare, right? We need to rid women of these obligations, and then they can participate. Because Plato thought, after studying women for a while, he really thought, after looking at them, deeply that they seemed to be equally capable as men. It's very smart of him. They're just held back. They're held back by their family, he said. So, can't have families, right? If you want to be the boss. If you don't want to be the boss, fine. Have property, have your family, whatever. But if you want to be in politics, there's absolute austerity. That's one problem he tried to solve, right? You can see this is interesting. I'm not saying we should do this, but it's provocative, right, as an idea. We can talk about your thoughts on this after I'm done. The second thing he said we need to overcome to get to this better society is this ignorance. Yeah, we don't know enough where we are now. So the main thing that the state should do, state should do a lot of things, right? State should regulate the economy, state should have the army, all that stuff. But the most important thing the state should do is organize education, he says. That's the first thing. That's the priority. Because that's how we're going to improve. Because we're stupid. We know nothing. We don't even know why it rains. Yeah? So we really need to get out of this pool of ignorance that we're collectively in and get better. And this is so important that you cannot have this private, because in his day schools were private, right? His academy was Plato's academy. You pay to Plato, you come to his classes, right? But he said this is not good enough because not everybody can get it, because not everybody can pay, and the government, since it's private, they don't know what they're teaching. Maybe they're teaching nonsense, right? Half of my colleagues of these other academies are swindlers. They don't really know what they're talking about. So in my ideal state, this is going to be centralized, right? Somebody like me is going to be Minister of Education, tell everybody what they need to learn, and that's going to be the best. So he's going to have fully public education, which again in his day is so revolutionary because almost nobody go to school, right? And for another 2,500 years, we would not actually do this. Yeah, only since mid last century you had general education. But he had the idea very early on. He said, so what I want is free elementary education until 20, for both boys and girls. Again, nobody before and after him talks about girls going to school. And that education should have two components. It's not just reading books. It's also physical, right? Because we live in a bad world. Like the war is happening all the time. So there's physical education. You're going to get in shape, right? Like if you join the army, push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, that, running around the barracks. Half the day is that. And also like weird discipline exercises, like don't flinch type of stuff. And the other day is reading books, is mental training, mainly consisting, this can sound a bit weird, but you have to understand the context, of poetry and culture, studying plays, studying poems. Why? I don't know if you know this, but in his day, text like we have it, like my slides are, didn't exist. You only had rhymes because most people couldn't read. So the standard way of writing something was to write it as if it was a rap. Because people, since they can't read, and since you don't have paper and such, like you can write, but you have to carve it in stone. And okay, paper, you have paper, but it's super rare. The easiest way to transfer text is to memorize it. So all important things would be written in a rhythm, so it's easy to remember, right? Like rap songs. So if you would read stuff, that would be called poetry, right? All books would be written in poetry format, including Plato. His books, I'm not saying this, but his books they take the form of a dialogue. They're a conversation between two people, like if it was a script for a theater play, right? So that's what he means with poetry. Of course, censored by the state, right? No nonsense, only the most educational stuff. No things that are just beautiful or fun. No. Only what's good for you. Plato was really authoritarian, by the way, in cultural. Like he he had all kind of rules, what kind of music you could listen to, and which music, oh, this music is too happy, that's just distracting, we need serious music, and this and that. He was quite authoritarian with this. But okay, everybody that's not a slave goes to education until 20. And then the smartest kids, the ones that get selected, right, in our divergent type universe to go on, they get higher education. So if you were good, if you were not, came out of this first 20 years as a craftsman, as working class, you then would go on for another 15 years till you're 35 to become a leader. Either the king, that would be then the smartest person, or you would become one of the people who work for the government. So you would spend 15 years of your life studying mathematics, logic, astronomy, philosophy, etc. I don't really know back in that day how you could even study for 35 years. I didn't know there was that much you could even know. But whatever, he had a plan for it, apparently. And you would live at the academy, you would live with him, basically, and you would also do research and you would produce knowledge. That's the idea, right? So you have these hyper-trained leaders. That's how you get quality, you would say. And that's the idea behind the Republic, right? Now, I didn't yet give you the plan of how in practice this is organized. I'm not going to, because it's not interesting. Like at the end, he makes some kind of, okay, so this is how we're going to do it. We're all going to live in a village together, in separate houses, in circles of 16, and every household is one slave, and everybody spends half their days doing politics, and he has all kind of weird rules that don't, like, nobody wants to live like that. That's why nobody did that. But he had some practical plan for it, but it's not relevant, his practical plan, because it never happened, etc. More important is these ideas. The closest thing that ever happened to what Plato wanted in real life is something like a monastery, right? Where everybody's dedicated, everybody has their tasks. It's all about studying, right? Monks study all day. It's super disciplined. So monasteries are the closest thing that ever happened to his plan of society. But, well, it never happened on a state level. Not that he didn't try. Plato tried. Plato tried to find kings that would listen to him. He could go to, and not just Athens, right? He would go all around, well, the known world back then, ask kings, hey, can I teach your son, right? To become really smart. And sometimes they said yes, but he got very disappointed in this. Well, I'm going to talk about that now. So when he wrote the Republic, he was still young and he was optimistic. He said, we're going to do this, right? He was very radical. He was trying to create a utopia, a perfect world, based on the insight of a perfectly educated leader. As he got older and he tried to do that, he basically realized it was not going to work because he was surrounded by idiots. So he would sometimes get a chance to teach someone's son, and then that dude would fuck up once he had power, and it just never ended well. And his best student, Aristotle, turned away from him, betrayed him. So, like, his one thing that he had hoped for also failed. So he just said, nah, it's just not happening. I'm surrounded by clowns. And I'm gonna die. I'm gonna die in this surrounded by idiots. So before I die, I should write a book, What to Do If You're Surrounded by Idiots, but you still want to create a better world, right? So he wrote 2 books about this subject. How can we create a better society? Not a perfect one, because the quality isn't there. How can we create a better society at least? Building on the fact that I'm surrounded by idiots, right? And okay, I say it strong, we don't think people are idiots, but how do we build society that is flawed? This is less exciting, so I spent much less time about it, because it's, he's kind of given up here. But says, okay, how will we do this then? Now, in his book called The Laws, he says, well, one thing we could do is try to have laws. They say, isn't that evident? No, there are no laws in the Republic. In his previous plan, there is no such thing as the law. There's no constitution. Everything is decided by the leader. It's a absolute dictatorship, right? If the king wants to change the rules, then the rules have changed. Why? Because the king knows best. Yeah, and it kind of makes sense what he's saying, because laws are always based on how, like on something that worked back then when you created the law, right? Like the American Constitution might have been a good idea back then, but things change over time, right? For example, people were allowed to have guns, but you didn't have machine guns back when this rule was written. So the ruler, if he's perfectly smart, usually knows better than some decide 40 years ago when we wrote the law, 200 years ago. So there was no real need for laws. But here he says, okay, maybe we should have laws. Because I'm assuming that there's this perfect philosopher king. He's not there. I'm the closest thing to it, and I'm not the king. So, not me, Tuur, but him, Plato. So, you should go for something else, right? Maybe we can have laws. Laws are not great because they're always outdated, but at least they're mostly good, right? Laws get made by wise people. We really think, oh, what should we do now? Then we write it into on paper. That probably is better than the arbitrary commands of the leader, given the leader is not brilliant. So laws are a bit like frozen wisdom. And wisdom is not as good as knowledge, but it's the best we know right now. Right? It's about what worked in the past. That's not great, but that's the second best option. And he now realized that he was in a second best world, let's say, when he was old and bitter and grumpy. So he says, okay, let's look then, finally, at politics as it is. Yeah, what type of government exists in his day? These are all city-state governments, right? So he's not just looking at Athens, he's looking at Sparta, he's looking at Middle East, whatever they were doing in Europe back then, Egypt, etc. So he says, okay, what do I see? Well, if I look at them all, I still think my plan is the best, except I haven't found this philosopher king yet. So, of the things that are actually there, we have 6 types of government. And this is a classic, this roster. For like 1,000 years, everybody would copy this distinction. It's a reflection of the world of ideas as it is. He said, but we could figure those ideas out, Miss Astrid. He said, once we understand them, we could be better. And the philosopher king is not the person who knows everything. Is a person who knows how to know things. Right? It's a person that's trained in research. It's a person that doesn't know everything, but that is good at absorbing the information as it unfolds itself. So the philosopher king would be best at reacting to new situations because he knows how to figure it out. He doesn't already know everything, right? He's not omni-knowledgeable. He's super good at learning. That's more what he wants. Well, nobody would be able to do it, but we would have the best possible, right? Somebody has to be the smartest. So that's more how he saw it. But as you say, yeah, it is a bit utopian, right? On average, by the way, dictatorships rarely tend to have this type of leader. Yeah, the dictatorship makes sense because you would have the best ruling, but the best rarely is the best. The best is usually the person who killed the best and then became the king. Yeah, that's usually who ends up being the dictator. So in practice, it's not very practical, and he realized that. So he said, at things that actually exist, we have 6 types of government.
First of all, we have the popular monarchy. So this is a king, a ruler who is wise, who people genuinely like. People can't get rid of him, and you know he is a dictator, but he's loved. Somebody like Fidel Castro, right? Somebody who, okay, they're in power. Most people like him, at least at the start. They're kind of enlightenment. They talk a lot. They explain to people why they're doing things. Fidel Castro would spend hours on TV explaining why he took this decision, right? But there is not democracy, right? That's probably the best option, he would say. The opposite of that is tyranny. So now you have a ruler that is the ruler just because they have the power. They don't explain anything. They just do stuff. Emperor Nero that burned his own city for fun. That would be an example of this, right? Just some cruel idiot leader, like in Game of Thrones, when that little kid becomes the ruler of the main kingdom. That. Then you have aristocracy. This is the rule of the best. So this is like old families who were raised to be rulers type of situation. The variant of this is oligarchy, which is the rule of the richest. These were people who were also the best, but they were not prepared for it, let's say. And then you have democracy, which you have two variants. You have a controlled democracy, which means a democracy where people have limited choices and there's certain rules they cannot change. And then you have radical democracy, which is democracy in which everything is up for vote. Like it's the old Athens. If the people decided the law was different, then the law is different now. Yeah. Now Plato says all of this sucks, but some are better than other. The first three are usually superior to the bottom three, right? A popular king, a wise kind of generally good leader is better than a tyrant. Aristocracy is better than oligarchy, and a controlled democracy is better than a radical democracy. And what they had in common is that they were all lawful, right? In aristocracy, you were designated to be the leader, so according to law. In a controlled democracy, you had a constitution that set limits to things. And a popular monarchy, the king had to create laws. He couldn't just do things because he wanted to. He had to put it in rules and explain those rules. So in all not terrible scenarios, you would have a rule of law. And what typified all bad scenarios, a radical democracy is democracy. Astrid asked, what's a radical democracy? Is democracy in which the people can change anything. So the people want to abolish the police, then the police gets abolished, right? Somebody would get up, say, hey, let's have a vote about this. People would vote, and that's how it is. So a radical democracy, the people, the majority, would have literally all the power. While in a controlled democracy is something like the United States right now. Like the people elect leaders. Those leaders, we don't really care about the people, and they have their constitution, and things cannot really change. Okay, you have two parties, you're screwed anyway. But people do vote, they participate, but they don't really have the power. In a radical democracy, they would, and they could kill the aristocracy, let's say, if they wanted that. It's the rule of the mass. And Plato hated democracy. So we said, all right, so what are we going to do then? He said, well, if you look at these, one thing that they have in common, the bad scenarios, besides that they don't have laws, or they don't have permanent laws, is that they have an excess of freedom or power, right? Either the ruler is too free to do what he wants, or the people are too free, or they have too much power. And with both democracies and tyrannies, this leads to ruin. This leads to them taking either very bad decisions or them For example, in absolute democracy, the majority could decide to kill the minority, right? If you have two ethnical groups and one is more of them, they could just have a vote. Hey, we're gonna do genocide on the other, and then they could do that. Not that these things happen in practice, but you could. Well, they sometimes do, but you could. So it says this leads to bad things if there's too much power or freedom. That leads to ignorance. It leads to corruption, and it will grow, right? Especially in theory, it will get very corrupt, and they will just lose track of what they were supposed to do, which is rule the country. So, although these things are both bad, one way to make them not catastrophical is to combine them. If we somehow balance these two bad forms of governments against each other, without choosing between them, because I hate them both, he would say, we would at least create some stability. So what we should do is have a mixed state. I'm not going to choose which state because I dislike them all, but I probably would prefer an aristocracy, but whatever. So if you have a democracy, all right, people can decide, but the best people tell them what they can decide about, right? So let's say you have a representative system, you can vote, but you can only vote on rich people. You can only vote on old, educated people. Yeah? Or you can have consultas, but we say what the question is. We, the council of wise men, or something like that. That's the way you would say to say democracy, basically representative democracy, right? With not that much participation. Or in case you have an aristocracy, he said we should give the people some type of power, like to get rid of the leader, maybe. Like they don't decide what the leader has to do, but if they all hate him, they could get rid of him. Or the leader has to spend, I don't know, 1 day a week listening to the people, or something like that. So that if we combine them, we get some balance. Now this all sounds logical. It's also a bit boring, I would say. It's not original what he's saying. It's much less original than the Republic. But he says that's the best we can do. And if we do this, if we have balance, not just here in economical life, environmental life, etc. And environment doesn't mean ecology, right? It just means like being in the right place. Then we can at least control a bit the chaotic forces in society. And maybe if we do that, we get slightly better people and they'll be able to create a better government, which will create better people. And then maybe one day we can get my philosopher king, or we can, we can get out of this mess and do my original plan. So in the laws, he basically sets a plan B to, until times get better, let's do this. And that, dear students, is where I'm going to end, because I'm out of breath and out of slides. So that is Plato. What do you think? Hello? Miss Susanna.
Well, I think that he is a very idealist person. I know he's from that side. Because he, even though there's some ideas that I really like about him, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't applies to reality since humans are not perfect. So whatever he's trying to do, like the ruler is supposed to know what's best for stuff, even if you take out all the distractions of the ruler, he still can be or she could be imperfect and make some decisions that are not what's best. But since the experience of people, like knowledge, the knowledge of people goes from experiences, and sometimes experiences can be limited, or sometimes they think something is the best but they are not taking in consideration other factors. So I think that there's some points that even though they sound reasonable, they are not, because reality is completely different from his idealist world. And that's it. Thank you.
Well, I would add to that though, he knows that. Like he doesn't trust the people. That's why it's this whole dictatorial plan, right? To train people for 35 years before you can do something, right? So he starts from a deep distrust in people, but he does believe that it's possible to change this. That's where he's idealist. He believes that we're just not there, but there is a state of perfection somewhere, and he thinks we could get there if we do radical stuff like taking away the property of leaders. Miss Yareli Abigail, sorry.
So I thought that his philosophy was going to be different because of his mentor. Because Socrates was the kind of person that asked people what they wanted and make them think about philosophy, and he assumed what people needed to be. I mean, for example, Socrates was more about what you want, what are you thinking about. Just start thinking more and more and more in order to become a better philosopher. While Socrates was like, are you intelligent or not? I mean, what you're good about this, and if you're good about this, you don't need to do anything else. So, I mean, this class showed me like a different perspective from him, from what I thought he was going to be or what I have learned about him. So it was pretty interesting.
Well, he does. I couldn't show you that because these are slides, not his book, right? He has the same style as Socrates. He writes in the same dialogue, asking people stuff sense. Matter of fact, Socrates is Plato in a sense, because Socrates has not written any books. What we know of Socrates is what Plato wrote about him. So we don't even know if Socrates existed. He probably did, but he talked through Plato. So they have the same style. They do have this dialogue style, but Socrates was more patient than Plato. Plato is much more impatient teacher, I think, with people. I think that's kind of what you get to, right? He's less
Yes, I
of a
mean,
humanist.
the
Yeah.
idea we have of Socrates is idea that it was constructed, or I mean, what we know about him is what Plato wrote about him. We don't really know what he did 100%. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I expect him to be a little bit more patient or comprehensive about the society, not all about you're intelligent. No, I mean you're good about this. You should not do another thing because it's the way you are going to help society. I thought he was going to be more, yeah, comprehensive about them. So he did a lot of good stuff,
Uh-huh.
but not that his ideology is bad or not. I mean, it's his ideology, but but it was pretty interesting to see that perspective from him. From him.
He's quite intense. You could
Uh,
describe him like that, right? Astrid.
Yes. Also, adding to the fact that Plato thought that people needed to specialize in something that you were best. Well, what if a person was good at mathematics but not good enough for it to advantage or create an advantage to our society? What if people weren't good enough the way that Plato created or stated the republic for it to work better?
I don't know literally what he wrote about that, but logically, he would say, first of all, let's really try to fix that with education, right? So he didn't really believe he believed people were being idiots, not that people were inherently stupid, right? He believed you could fix most by listening to him and coming to his classes. But there's different roles, right? So let's say mathematics, okay, you also have lower level accountants that you need, and you have somebody who needs to count the amount of cows that you have, and there's you don't need to be the master in each job to have a role, I think. But yeah, he wasn't really thinking about failure. What do you guys think, and girls think about his proposal for corruption?
The fact that he wants people, well, rulers, to not have a private property. Well, I was talking to Paco Larriba, and he stated that it was a way to create a filter for rulers not to be
Selfish.
selfish, yeah, and that way it could benefit more our society. That's what he told me, and I agree with that. It makes sense in some point, but I also think that it would be really mm, more of a sacrifice than a benefit
Mhm.
for the person. Benefit for the society, but a sacrifice for the person. So, is it really worth it? That's my question.
Okay, not that we're doing this, but it goes a little bit in direction of the current philosophy of the government, where they lower the wages of all government workers, all executives, right, to where a level where, like, the director of this faculty earns more than the president, right, and then all his cabinet. So you really need to want this job. Like, you're not gonna have this job just to get rich if you want to be a leader today. You're gonna earn more than me, but So yeah, a little bit, but Plato goes a lot further, right? He says it's a more communist thing, like you just have nothing. Um, Anyone else has ideas on this? Francisco.
Yes. I know that what Plato said about corruption was a little bit radical, and that well, I agree that that's like the direction that we're taking nowadays against corruption. But what do you think are the best steps? Not what good steps we're actually taking, but what steps should we take in order to end corruption, or at least fight it?
Okay, that's a more technical question, right? Of what we could do more. I think we need to do. So you've seen that the government in certain areas has been able to purge corruption. For example, I'll give you one example. Migration, the Institute of Migration, they recently fired 1,000 people for being corrupt, right? I think we need more of this type of inquisition like investigations where you just take, for example, universities, public universities, full of corruption. Yeah, you know this. Um, that you go through them one by one, I think, try to filter them. That's one thing. I think you should raise the wages of lower government workers, of teachers, for example, so they don't. Because now the government is lowering the wages of the highest ones, but we also need to raise up the wages. For example, of police. I think police should earn more, so they are not constantly looking for bribes. I think we should, if we talk about police and this kind of functions, I think they should have a year extra training in academy that just kind of instills the love of the country in them. Um, I think we should have more emphasis on this culture of legality. I think people have culturally kind of given up on corruption, right? Like, you grow up in a corrupt world, so you're like, ah, well,
if I steal too, that's just how it works. I think we should get rid of that. And then there are a bunch of technical things to do, which have to do with making it easier to file complaints. Like each agency, for example, in our faculty, it just doesn't work. The person who handles this is Thomas, is the lawyer of the faculty. You don't have him yet, but shit, I'm being recorded saying this. Damn it. Anyway, like you should have very solid complaint procedures. You could have rules that you cannot either come from or go to private sector in the same area that you've been. For example, I think Antonio Mead is now working in banking in finance sector. I think, I'm not certain, but I think it. And he was Minister of Finance before, right, of Hacienda. I don't think that should be possible. I don't think you can work in the same sector that you've been in charge of. I think that invites too much corruption. These are some things you could do. But I don't have a master plan right now. I have a class on corruption. I just don't have these slides ready. It's been years since I taught that class. I hope I answered a bit your question.
Are we gonna get to see that class later in the semester?
No, it's from another part, but I can think more about this question. What do you think we should do? Do you have something in mind?
Not really. It's just that it's just such a widespread problem that every time that I try to think of some way to fix it or to change something, I just come across with the problem that it's too big to be fixed, at least on a short term. I think there are a lot of aspects in the society, in that problem, in the government, that we should tackle at the same time for a long time before we can even consider it to be solved. Like you said, many people have given up on corruption because that's what they are used to. And if we pushed the government of corrupt officials, well, then we'll just have a bunch of corrupt, unemployed people, which would be another problem. Money
They
would
would be
find
in
a
jail.
way. Oh,
Yeah,
oh, yeah. I think that's the solution.
but I think what so you have what the president can do, etc. But I think it also people need to start resisting corruption. Like people need to stop giving bribes to people who ask for bribes, right? Um, we, for example, I think we accept corruption too much. Let me ask you something to the group here. How many of you have a friend or would have a friend or family member that's corrupt? And maybe like your dad is that person that answers the question, but I think a lot of you would tolerate that. Yeah. But then would you tolerate having a boy or girlfriend that you know is corrupt? Like they buy you nice stuff, etc. You just know they're stealing it, right? Let's say from the university. I don't have time to ask you all this question, but the answer should increasingly be no to this if we want to change things. Guillermo and Samantha were going to say something.
Yeah, in regards to what you're saying right now, I agree that we do accept the corruptive ways that we have in an everyday basis, and specifically speaking about this country and the city that we live in, I think it's an issue that the level of impunity that we have with this subject is also what fuels the fact that we all accept it. If we were in a place where the punishment or the fine or I don't know, whatever the measure for corruption or yeah, any kind of behavior that is against the basic rules of how our society should work was actually imposed, then I would think then that the levels of corruption and abuse of power would be less. But I don't know what you think about that.
So, wait, how would you summarize it?
if we had a state that was stronger at applying the rules, then the rules would be
Yes.
followed.
I think we need some convictions of some more high profile convictions of corrupt people that would show you that you cannot just break the rules, right? Guillermo, what would you have to add to this, sir?
Teacher, I think that we in Mexico have a big corruption problem because where I come from, there's barely any difference between the bad guys and the good guys, and this
You're
is
from Tamaulipas?
yeah, I'm from Reynosa.
See, I know things. Yeah, no.
And in Reynosa, they don't actually care where the money comes from. So they just see it as money and as power, if you want to see it that way. And I think that we have a problem that big that it can be solved as easy or as fast as we wanted to. And I what or if you have any solutions for that.
No, I don't know how to fix Tamaulipas. That's a giant question there. Um, I think you need different. I think you need different political parties than you've had in power, right? Oh, that's my opinion on that. I think the ones that had power
But
kind of demonstrated they're not about it. But that's not the full solution, right? Because you're trying to tell you that the environment itself corrupts. Like whoever we would put there would get corrupted, correct?
But teacher, even in Reynosa, the politicians doesn't have the balls, let's put it like that, to live in Reynosa. They live in the United States in McAllen, so they don't even care what happens to Reynosa. You know, they just care about money and about making this narco business profitable in order to keep winning more. So I think that we have to put more strict rules to politicians in Tamaulipas, maybe.
So you could look at it from two sides. What you're saying, right? Of course, it's true. Also, if we think about like a larger organized crime, like the bigger picture, I do believe, and I agree with Plato, that if you have less inequality, you would have better people. I believe that if you would have less poverty, and if people's opportunities would be better, then they would be less ordinary people, right? I'm not talking about the leaders necessarily, but like your local policeman, your local whatever, they would be less tempted to cheat the system or less forced to cheat the system. So I think socioeconomic development can help. I think you need a combination of that and both of softer and harder approach, let's say. But I won't pretend I have an easy solution to solve that. I do believe you need radicals. I think you need leaders who are just about that, whose life is dedicated to changing this, and who might even be willing to die for it. And you have them in history, right? You have Mexico is a bit tame in this. If you look at the Middle East, the Arab Spring, you had people dying to get rid of dictators, right? In this millennia. So you need some radicals. Miss Miranda, she says, teacher, you're over time. We want to go. I get it.
Yes, sorry. I was just wondering, like, what kind of solutions may be possible for like the younger people, like for us, the youth, because I have seen a lot of cases. I have a friend that her dad is the mayor, so she gets calls randomly from people that she knew or like she doesn't get along a lot, but they called her when they have a problem and they're like, can you please help us? Can you tell your dad that get me out of this jam and stuff? So what can be like a solution for us, the young people, to like avoid
corruption?
Well, not to be corrupt. I don't really know what to say to that.
But like, do you think that's that comes from the education we receive at home, or like from
No,
school?
no. I don't really believe too much in that type of education. I think it's about how we interact in society, how we interact outdoors. If you see much good examples, and that could be your dad, that could be in your house, but that doesn't need to be. I think if you see that good examples, I think if you see uncorruptible people, if you try to be that and inspire others, if you're just to others, I think we can get in a habit of justice. I think it's a cultural thing. I think it's not in the family. I think it's society as a whole. But okay, I don't have all the answers to that, and you should think about what your answers are. Was there somebody who still want to ask me something before we conclude this, dear students? We're going to talk about all these subjects later on. Well, they're going to come up again, right? Susanna?
Doctor, I have a.
No. Please tell me. The person that just talked. Hello? Miss? Doctor, I have a... No.
I think she's gone.
Okay. She was taken from us. I hope she's back next time. All right, students, I'm not going to keep you...
Sorry, don't go. I couldn't open my microphone, sorry. I know the time is over, but for what Samantha said about the mechanism to control the corruption, don't you believe that in Mexico it can become kind of authoritarian or a spreading or of too much fear? Because I don't know, I think that organized crime is also a big part of our corruption. So too much fear can generate chaos. Because in the other hand, I believe that for a good policy, the respect for human rights has to be the main goal. But in Mexico, we have such a big problem respecting human rights. So how can you control corruption without spreading too much fear, but also respecting human rights? Like, because in Mexico, we have to be honest that too much things are going on, and we have a big problem limiting things. So that's my question. How do you do that in our circumstances?
I don't have all these answers. I will first of all agree with you that we have the risk if you want to go too hard on things and being authoritarian. That doesn't guarantee it works, right? We saw this with Calderon's administration, right? All in against drugs, and at the end he was narco himself. So there was one big joke, basically. At least I'm being political now. You can disagree with me, whatever, right? I'm giving my opinion. That was a bit disappointing, right? That even they were then infiltrated. So yeah, you should be very careful before you go hard on things. But I don't know that going against corruption in a legal sense, in the sense of the SAT and the Financial Unit and the Fiscalia going after people, I don't know if that violates human rights, right? It's not violence. So I don't think that to fight corruption I think you need to be violent, but you can still say, yeah, maybe it gets a bit authoritarian, if that's what you want to call it. I would just call it strict, but you could call it authoritarian if they're investigating everyone, right? I'm sure if you're the family of one of those people, that you feel it authoritarian. I just don't think we're there yet. What you do need to avoid, what historically is a danger, especially with socialist presidents like AMLO, is not to get paranoid, right? Once they believe that everything's against them, then you could get a situation when they over investigate and try to purge everything, and that can create fear and mistrust, and that can make things function less good. That risk you have there, yeah. But I think it is possible to respect human rights and fight corruption. Yeah, I think that is definitely possible. But I don't have perfect answers, Miss Sophia. That's why you are the student and you're going to figure this out. You're going to, like Plato said, you're going to become a brilliant woman that has these answers. I'm just a stepping stone in your journey to getting there. Stalin is an example of this, yes. Anything else, or are we done for today? And next time we will start with Plato's best student, Aristotle. I think that's our plan. All right, so I say goodbye to you.
Thank you.
Later, doctor.
Thanks, doctor. Bye-bye.
Yes.
Thank you. Have
Thank
have a nice day.
Yep. See you guys and girls later.